Can't decide and torn between a romantic, comedy, action, or an indie film to watch for the weekend? Well. Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast is your ultimate guide to the latest movies. Join us as we dissect the latest on the blockbusters. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast.
GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Rich McDonough, and this episode should be coming to you towards the end of March. And as we get closer to warm weather, widespread vaccinations, and more places opening up, hopefully we are also inching towards a return to normalcy. I know that a lot of people are desperate for that. So hopefully we are getting closer to that being a reality. And I know that the film industry is definitely looking for a return to normalcy, so their big event films are able to make significant box office paydays. And we are finally getting to a point where big box office draws are finally being released after being delayed due to COVID-19. And one such release is the highly anticipated Godzilla vs. Kong movie, which will be the first film I am focusing on today on this episode of the GSMC Movie Podcast. I'll also be taking a look at the new Bob Odenkirk film, Nobody, as well as taking a look at the new dramatic film, The Good Traitor, which centers around a Danish diplomat who refuses to go along with Nazi instructions after his country has been invaded. And be sure to stick around until the end of the show, because something that has completely escaped my mind is the fact that the SAG Awards are coming up, which, for those of you who don't know, are awards awarded to actors as voted on by their peers in the Screen Actors Guild. And this award ceremony always interests me because it is the consensus of the people that do the craft. It's not a bunch of reporters that have preconceived notions on what good acting should be, but it's people that do it themselves and recognize which actors have made the largest sacrifices to portray the characters they've been cast as. So with that ceremony set to take place on April 4th, which is also Easter Sunday, I'll be taking a look at the film nominees and making some picks for that. So be sure to stick around for that. But as with every new episode, we are going to be starting with a movie from the book of 1001 Movies to See Before You Die. And for once, the movie I'm talking about from the book is actually going to be on theme with this episode, because I'm talking about the original King Kong movie. And it will give you an idea of how long that Godzilla vs. Kong has been in the making, given that King Kong, the original, came out in 1933. Directed by Marion C. Cooper and Ernest B. Schoedsack. This film was a pioneer at the time for visual effects, and while the visual effects may not hold up today, the film itself is still highly reviewed by audiences. A classic telling of Beauty and the Beast, this film brought us iconic images like King Kong on top of the Empire State Building being surrounded by planes, which is something that is still homaged today. So the lasting power of this film and its impact on American media is tremendous. So the original King Kong is more than just a monster flick. It's really just an amazing piece of cinema. And if anyone is interested in viewing it, you can check it out on HBO Max. And that streaming platform seems to be doing everything it can to give people monster movie fever as we get closer to the release of Godzilla vs. Kong, because you are also able to see the original Godzilla on that platform. Now, the original Godzilla is not in the 1001 movie book, but in the lead up to this clash of giant monster movie titans, I say go all out when it comes to getting into the spirit for a film. But all in all, the piece of classic cinema I recommend people watch this week is King Kong, the original from 1933. And without any further delay, it is now time to get into the most recent King Kong movie. And that, of course, is the much-anticipated Godzilla vs. Kong. And the reason I say this is highly anticipated is just what more could you want from a movie? There will be a giant lizard and a giant gorilla, and at some point they're going to fight each other. In terms of actual screen time dedicated to this fight, it could be less than 5 minutes when all is said and done, but the incredible detail that both of these animals are going to be designed with will make this a truly amazing spectacle. And I know that this technically isn't even the first time Godzilla has faced King Kong in a movie, but I would like to think that this version has come a bit further since 1962, when it was just two people in Halloween store costumes hitting each other with fake trees. And me personally, I'm a person who likes to go into a movie that makes me think, that has an intricate plot, where the actors are emotionally invested in their performances, and usually movies that are all spectacle don't do it for me, but I could care less what the plot of this movie is. I'm sure it's going to be a lot of not-so-subtle stuff about climate change, much like the last Godzilla movie was, which, I'll be completely honest, I did not see the most recent Godzilla. Having seen the one from, I think, 1997 with Matthew Broderick kind of soured me on the idea. But having seen clips from it, I am really excited to see what's going to happen when it's a giant, essentially a dragon versus a giant gorilla. And I'll be honest, I have not seen the most recent King Kong film either, mostly because that starred Jack Black, and my God, is he in some terrible movies. But setting aside the terrible incarnations of these two movie monsters when they've been brought to film, again, this plot could have a million holes in it. The actors in it could be phoning in these performances all the way to the bank. I don't care. As long as there is a bunch of monster-on-monster violence, this film has delivered on what it has promised. But while this movie is built around the epic showdown of King Kong versus Godzilla, this should be a pretty well-rounded movie. Not only from a visual effects standpoint, given that they've used the moving picture company, Weta Digital, and Scanline VFX, which are companies that have worked on projects like Zack Snyder's Justice League, Avengers Endgame, and pretty much every major superhero film. So you're pretty much guaranteed that the quality of the two titular movie monsters are going to be through the roof, but there are also some terrific actors in it as well. In the lead role is Alexander Skarsgård, which is one of the many talented children of Stellan Skarsgård. His brother Bill was Pennywise, but alongside him in this film will be Millie Bobby Brown, who most people will probably know from Stranger Things. Also in this film is Rebecca Hall, who has been in other blockbusters like The Town and Iron Man 3. The incredibly talented Brian Tyree Henry will also be in this film. Most people will know him from his starring role on Donald Glover's Atlanta, where he plays Alfred Paperboy Mills. And rounding out the main cast is Coach Taylor from Friday Night Lights. And of course the actor's name is Kyle Chandler, but he has just grown so synonymous with that role, it's hard to see him as anything else. So, this film has a terrific cast, and you are pretty much guaranteed outstanding visual effects based on the companies that have been working on this film. The only real question mark I see on this film is the director, Adam Wingard. He seems to be relatively inexperienced when it comes to big budget blockbuster type films. Probably the highest profile thing he's directed was the sequel to the Blair Witch Project, The Blair Witch. But who knows, he may smash it out of the park, and when you have two of the most widely recognized legendary movie properties coming together in a film for the first time in pretty much 60 years, it's kind of hard to mess it up. But again, I've said the plot to this movie could be absolute hogwash, and audiences will still lap it up, given that this film has been talked about and in development for pretty much 6 years, going back to when Legendary moved the distribution rights to King Kong over from Universal to Warner Brothers, giving them the rights to both King Kong and Godzilla. And with the current movie landscape, where everything that shares even the slightest connection to another source material gets a crossover, it was inevitable that these two were going to be put into the same film together, and this is what Legendary Entertainment is calling the Monsterverse, with Godzilla vs. Kong being the fourth installment in this franchise. And I think that this one certainly has the most to offer out of any of the films in this Monsterverse, despite the fact it may not be able to compete with the other films on a box office level, given that theaters are still operating under heavy restrictions. But the three previous films have been building to this moment, and I'm sure it will live up to the billing. And hopefully it will set the stage for more movies to come. There has been talk about a Pacific Rim crossover, and for those of you who don't know, Pacific Rim are the movies with the man-operated, Transformer-like giant robots, and there has been talks about crossing over with them, and I know this film is Godzilla vs. Kong, but if there could be a team-up movie where they have to fight giant robots, I don't think there's much more you could ask from a movie, and if you can enjoy a giant gorilla and a giant dragon fighting giant killer robots, then there is something wrong with you. So here's hoping Godzilla vs. Kong is such a success, it translates into another movie where they're teaming up to fight the robots from Pacific Rim. And I'm not just encouraging people to go see this movie for the sheer spectacle of it and the pure entertainment value of a giant gorilla fighting a giant dragon. I also encourage people to go see it because it's not very obvious when a historic moment in film history is happening. But in all seriousness, Godzilla meeting King Kong on screen is a significant moment in cinema history. And I know that the premise is based around two monsters fighting each other, but when you consider the cultural significance that both these characters have and the staying power that each of them has, given that we're pretty much 88 years from the original King Kong debuting, and 66 years removed from the original Godzilla debuting, and there are still audiences that will line up to see these characters in a movie still. I do wish that times were normal and people could line up in a theater to see this movie in keeping with the tradition of a big cinematic event, because something like this really is a special moment in cinema history, and it really deserves that debut on the big screen. And if you are able to, I definitely encourage you to go see this in theaters. Of course, be safe, but something like this deserves to be seen on the big screen. And with so many blockbusters just feeling hollow and just put out for the sake of making money without any real substance to them and just a spectacle to give the audiences something to look at, whatever the substance of Godzilla vs. Kong, this movie just feels like a real event type movie where it has that audience anticipation, and really whatever the final product is, I think people are going to walk away from this film satisfied. And for those of you who are curious about what the actual structure of this film is going to be, I'll give you a quick synopsis without giving too much away about the film. And I do have to make a correction. The terrible Jack Black King Kong movie was not the most recent one. King Kong Skull Island was. And this movie is set after that, where they are trying to find King Kong's true home. But in the Monsterverse, things cannot be that simple. While in transit, in search of his true home, they come across an enraged Godzilla. It is unclear as to why Godzilla is so enraged, but I really don't think a giant radioactive reptile needs reasons to be pissed off. But whatever his reasons are, he and King Kong come face to face, and it feels weird comparing two giant movie monsters to gunslingers, but inevitably when they cross paths, it needs to be determined which one is the better of the two and which is the most dominant. And unfortunately for humanity, we are going to be caught in the middle of it. And from the shots that they've included to the trailer to this film, the fight between these two legendary movie monsters looks amazing. And I really hope this film doesn't get too bogged down in explaining why these two monsters are fighting, overloading the audience with subtext. I really just hope that from the beginning of this movie, the bell rings, and we as an audience are treated to the most epic prize fight in cinema history. And honestly, I'm just curious to see who will win this fight. Godzilla obviously has supernatural abilities, but King Kong has, I would assume, higher intelligence, as well as an opposable thumb, and is probably the more athletic of the two. So when you look at the tail of the tape, each quote-unquote fighter has different advantages going into this fight. I may have to make a Twitter poll and get a sense of what people think in terms of who would be the actual winner in a fight between Godzilla and King Kong. Like I said, King Kong probably has him on athleticism as well as intelligence. They may be pretty evenly matched when it comes to power, and Godzilla can breathe underwater, so that's a big advantage. But he does have smaller arms and less of a reach, but he does have the ability to breathe some sort of laser beam out of his mouth, so you have to give him the advantage on that one. And just the fact that I'm sitting here having this hypothetical conversation about two imaginary characters and the advantages they would have over each other in an imaginary fight, that's what filmmaking and cinema is all about. So once again, I encourage everyone to check out Godzilla vs. Kong. If you can, be sure to go see it in a theater, because this is one of those films that is just made for the big screen. But if you are still weary of returning to cinemas, the film will also be released simultaneously March 26th on HBO Max. Right now, however, we are going to be taking a quick break on the GSMC movie podcast, but be sure to stick around as we are going to be talking about the new Bob Odenkirk film, Nobody, where he plays a suburban dad out for revenge against people that terrorized him and his family. So that dark comedy action thriller should have a lot to offer. And I'm also going to be talking about the film The Good Traitor, which has a little bit more of a serious tone, where a Danish diplomat is defying the orders of the Nazis who have recently conquered his country of Denmark, and examines the idea of, is it ethical to not follow orders? And be sure to stick around until the end of the show, as we are going to be taking a look at the SAG Awards, which is the award ceremony that recognizes tremendous acting performances, and these are the awards given to actors by actors, as the people determining the winners are the members of the Screen Actors Guild. And I think it's always interesting to take a look at these awards because the winners are being recognized by their peers for the tremendous work that they've done. And when someone in the same field is saying that you gave a tremendous performance, that has to mean a lot. So don't go anywhere, as we have all that and more coming up on the GSMC Movie Podcast.
Want to know the latest and hottest music hitting the airwaves? Don't be left out. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast. It keeps you on the loop with everything you need to know from pop, rock, hip-hop, and the top 40. And we'll throw in news of your favorite artists, concert and tour dates, and so much more. Listen no further, because this is the gold standard in music podcast.
Welcome back into the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Rich McDonough, and I just finished talking about the epic Godzilla vs. Kong movie that is set to hit theaters March 26th, and it will also be available on HBO Max the same day. I referred to it in my last segment as the biggest prize fight in movie history, and right now on my Twitter poll, Godzilla has the slight edge over Kong when it comes to who people think will win, but all will be answered Friday, March 26th, so be sure to check it out. If you can, be sure to go see it in a theater. Definitely be safe, but this is one of those things that just necessitates being seen on a big screen. But if you are still weary of returning to theaters, you can definitely check it out on HBO Max the same day. And one thing you're also going to want to be sure to check out is the final segment of the GSMC Movie Podcast, as we're going to be diving into the nominees for this year's Screen Actors Guild Awards. These are the awards given to actors by actors, as the members of the Screen Actors Guild vote upon who gave the best performance of the year. So it'll be interesting to see who they think are most worthy of recognition. So be sure to stick around. But shifting gears, we're going to be talking about the new Bob Odenkirk film, Nobody. And to give a brief synopsis of this film, The premise is that Bob Odenkirk is a mild-mannered, middle-aged guy with a family, but one day a couple of thieves break into his house, and he doesn't do anything to defend himself or his family. He kind of just lets them ransack their house as to not create a larger conflict, and in the aftermath of this, his family begins to grow resentful of his actions, which is a little understandable, and they begin to drift away from him. This in turn causes Bob Odenkirk's character of Hutch to grow frustrated with himself and ignites this wild side of him where he is out for vengeance against the people that broke into his home and really embraces a very violent aspect of his personality. So this film is obviously rated R due to all the violence, but it is mostly played for laughs, which one would expect with someone like Bob Odenkirk being cast in the lead role. But this film also seems like it has a very layered subtext and hidden meaning behind what is seen on screen. So I'll throw on my amateur film analyst hat later on. I really need to get sound effects for these things. To all of those listening, and I really do appreciate you listening to this podcast, I owe you more in terms of sound effects, intros, signals for reoccurring segments. I owe you more. I need to do better, and I will do better. But I will give you some amateur film analysis later. Right now I want to talk about the cast, as it's pretty star-studded. As I said at the outset, the star of the movie is Bob Odenkirk, who most people will probably know as Saul from shows like Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. And it's really impressive the niche that he's carved out for himself as an actor, given that he started his career as a writer, working on such shows as SNL and Late Night with Conan O'Brien. So it's always interesting to see when someone makes that transition from writing to acting, and he has been very successful at it. Also in this film is the amazing Christopher Lloyd, who most people will know simply as Dr. Emmett Brown from the Back to the Future trilogy. He is an outstanding actor, and he will be playing Hutch's dad in this film, and it seems as though he's going to be stepping out of his traditional of wise old man, and it appears he will be a bit of a violent criminal type. So it'll be interesting to see a man who's so synonymous with playing a family-friendly character to someone who has a bit of a violent streak in them. Also in this film is the lovely Connie Nielsen, who plays Hutch's wife. Most people will know her as Wonder Woman's mother from the DCEU films. And for those of you listening who are fans of Metallica, she is the ex-wife of Lars Ulrich. And Nielsen tends to take more serious roles. And don't get me wrong, a movie where there's a home invasion and a family's there to witness it will have some serious moments. But it will be interesting to see how she reacts in the comedic moments of this film. And just to give you an idea of the type of laughs this movie is going for, Dutch's half-brother is played by the RZA. And I don't mean to be ignorant. There are plenty real-life examples of half-siblings being different races, but just the fact that Bob Odenkirk and the RZA are supposed to be playing brothers gives you an idea of some of the lunacy that the cast will get up to in this film. And while he is most definitely known for being part of the Wu-Tang Clan, the RZA is no slouch when it comes to acting, having been in films like American Gangster and Due Date. Also in the film is legendary voiceover actor Michael Ironside, who plays Hutch's father-in-law as well as Boss. So I'm sure that will be an interesting dynamic, and I definitely have something to say about that when I get to the analysis part of this podcast. But this guy has been in everything from Top Gun to Total Recall to X-Men First Class, so he's bringing a wealth of experience to this role. And one actor in this film who is probably the youngest member of the cast, Gage Monroe. Despite being only 22, he is also bringing a wealth of experience to this role, given that he has been acting since the age of 8. And some of his roles include the original voice of Marshall from Paw Patrol, which is all the rage with all the kids now. And he currently has a main role on the series Hotel Transylvania. So despite his youth, he is very experienced when it comes to acting. And one actor in this film that I'm not sure audiences will be too familiar with is Oleksiy Serebryakov. as he has primarily been a stage actor for most of his life, and the films that he have been in are mostly made for the audiences in his native Russia. But he will be brought in to play a Russian gangster who is the main adversary of Hutch and plans to eradicate him and his family. So, when you're casting a Russian gangster, don't settle for anything less than the real thing. And I'm not basing this off anything. I just have a feeling that after his performance in this movie, people are going to be a lot more familiar with Oleksii, and I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce his last name again because I'm sure I butchered it the first time. But there you have it, the main cast of the film Nobody. And while it is not a large one, everyone in it seems to have immense talent, which is always a good thing when making a movie. And when you're attempting to tell a message as complex as the one I believe Nobody is trying to tell, you need very talented actors that understand the subtext to what is happening on screen. And this is where my amateur film analysis is going to come in, because I think this film is pretty much just going to be one giant metaphor and critique on American masculinity. And this could be completely off base, but just from the description of Bob Odenkirk's character to the events that happen in the film, which precipitates the sudden personality shift, it seems like it's all one big metaphor for masculinity. And I'm sure I have college professors that are happy I'm thinking this way, but I really do believe it's supposed to be a critique on masculinity, given that Odenkirk's character is a mild-mannered family man who has a violent past. So at one point he tamed his savage nature in order to be a functioning member of society, but in doing so he is now averse to conflict, so when two thieves break into his home, he does not have the instinct to go against them or to protect himself or his family. So at the beginning of the film, he is without masculinity, and to define that real quick, what is masculinity? You're supposed to be tough, you're supposed to feel comfortable in a violent environment, and on a very primal level, you are supposed to be the provider and protector of your family. Now, when the main character, Hutch, is put in a position where he's given the opportunity to be violent and protect his family, he shies away from it. He has his reasons, and you will understand that as you watch the film, but on the surface, it just appears that he's a coward. And that's where I think the family dynamic is key to illustrating this point of him being emasculated. His wife and son are growing further apart. His wife isn't interested in him because he doesn't possess the qualities of an atypical male, and his son is distancing himself from his father because he doesn't see him as an adequate role model or someone that he can learn to be a man from. And I think the other family dynamics at play in this movie only reinforce that point, with his father-in-law being his boss. And traditionally, a father wants his daughter marrying someone who is able to take care of her in both a financial and physical sense. So based on the events of this film, I highly doubt that her father approves of the mate that she has chosen. So I'm sure there's going to be an adversarial relationship between Hutch and his father-in-law. And probably the most compelling and open for interpretation family dynamic is going to be Hutch, his father, and his half-brother. Now, it appears that Hutch's father is involved in a life of crime to some degree. So he's tough, he's comfortable in a violent environment, and he is willing to do whatever it takes in order to protect his family. So you have to imagine that he brought both his sons up in the same environment. However, at some point Hutch deviated from this lifestyle in order to become a quote-unquote functional member of society. His brother appears to have kept up with the family tradition and is following in the footsteps of their father. And this is where I understand the choice of casting the RZA as his half-brother, given that in mass media, African-American males are portrayed as the epitome of masculinity. So within his own family, Hutch doesn't measure up to the expectations of being a man. And apparently, if you're not measuring up to those expectations, you're nobody, hence the title. And with him facing this existential crisis, it's no wonder this precipitates a change where he just says, screw it, and embraces the violent tendencies that he's set aside, especially when he's faced with the ultimate challenge of a Russian gangster who's out to eradicate his family. Because in American film, what is the ultimate sign of a brutish masculine character? A Russian gangster. So when this Russian gangster threatens Hutch's family, and he needs to prove to himself and everyone else that he is a real man, he descends into his old violent tendencies. And in other words, he unleashes the savage beast that is man. And we will have to check out the film to see how this all turns out, and if I'm even remotely on base of what the filmmakers were trying to relay. I'm fairly confident that I am, but then again, I am just a dude with a microphone. But if I am right, it'll be interesting to see how the filmmakers portray masculinity and what conclusions they ultimately draw about it, and what they have to say about the contradictive nature of masculinity as an idea, given that you fulfill the criteria of being masculine as a violent brute, but in a broader sense, those qualities have no place in a civilized society. But all my philosophical film critiques aside, this movie does seem like it's going to be a well-acted, action-packed thrill ride with a decent amount of comic relief thrown in. The film, once again, is Nobody, starring Bob Odenkirk as a mild-mannered family man who is inevitably pushed into embracing a more violent side of his personality. And for those of you interested in seeing it, Nobody will be debuting in theaters Friday, March 26th. It is one of the few films that is actually only debuting in theaters that will not be having a simultaneous streaming release. So, if you want to check it out, be sure to hit the cinemas. And of course, in doing so, be safe, keep your distance, wear a mask, get extra butter, all that jazz. But right now, we're going to take a quick break on the GSMC movie podcast. But be sure to stick around as we are going to be talking about the new film, The Good Traitor, which is about a Danish ambassador during World War II who is refusing to go along with Nazi orders after they have invaded his home country of Denmark. And the film is really going to explore when is it ethical to disobey an order. So you will definitely want to stick around for that. And we are also going to be getting into the Screen Actors Guild Awards and take a look at the nominees in the film categories. And I know they are not the most prestigious awards, given that they've only been given out for the past 27 years, but they are awards voted on by members of the Screen Actors Guild. So these are the awards given out by other actors to the peers they think are the most deserving for the performances they gave that year. And I think there's a lot of stock that can be taken in winning a Screen Actors Guild Award. So you'll definitely want to stick around till the end of the show to hear what I have to say about those. And coming up in the next segment, I want to debut a new feature that I want to treat as a bit of a news segment and talk about things that are breaking in the film industry, what projects are being greenlit, what actors are being added to what. And I don't want this to be a who's sleeping with who got a DUI type segment, because I really could give two poops about the misadventures of famous people. But I do want to be providing my listeners with the latest breaking news when it comes to film projects that are in development, what studios are acquiring rights to which intellectual properties, which actors are attaching themselves to major projects, and just other news that takes place in the film industry, whether or not that's going to be something being delayed or just interesting content from an interview that I've seen recently. So we will have the first of these segments coming up after the break as a sort of re-entry from halftime. I really do have to come up with a name. I just have to check and see which ones aren't copyrighted already. So stay tuned for that, and we will be right back here on the GSMC Movie Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Into the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Rich McDonough, and I just finished talking about the new Bob Odenkirk film, Nobody, which is an action-packed dark comedy set for release Friday, March 26th, and it will be available exclusively in theaters. Coming up next, I'm going to be talking about the new film, The Good Traitor. And be sure to stick around till the end of the show, as I will be diving into the nominees for the Screen Actors Guild Awards. But right now, I want to introduce a new feature to the program, and it's pretty much going to be a news segment on what is happening in the film industry. Still haven't thought of a name for it, mostly because all the good ones are already copyrighted. But not only do I want to be bringing people news on the newest releases, I also want to be giving people news on things that are on the horizon, like who's being cast in what directors are being attached to which movies, and other news related to the industry. This feature, however, will not be about Hollywood gossip, like who's in trouble with the law, or which NBA player is dating a Kardashian sister this month. I want to do everything I can to protect my listeners' brain cells, and I just don't see a point in filling their head with information like that. But let's get into some late-breaking news in the industry. And unfortunately, we will be starting on a somber note, as legendary actor George Siegel has passed away at the age of 87. Siegel was nominated for an Academy Award for his performance in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and he enjoyed great success as a sitcom actor, starring in shows like Just Shoot Me and The Goldbergs. So he will be missed, but he's left an indelible legacy behind. So condolences to his family. But moving on to other news, the much anticipated Black Widow film is being pushed from May to July 9th. And this is the second time this film has been pushed back, with it originally being slated to come out November 2020. Reasons for the delay this time are a bit unclear, but it will also be debuting on Disney Plus the same day. So it'll be interesting to see as to why it is being moved back a second time. And I'm sure, as most people have heard by now, James Cameron's Avatar has reclaimed the title of highest grossing film of all time, given that it was re-released in China earlier this month. And I'm not sure if that was motivated for any other reason than insecurity from James Cameron not having the highest grossing film of all time. And I just don't understand that, given that even before now, he had 2 of the top 3 highest grossing films of all time. But whatever makes him happy, and he is slated to release sequels to Avatar in the near future. But moving on to a few casting announcements that have been made, Helen Mirren is going to be playing the villain in the upcoming Shazam sequel. So that will be unique, with someone of her esteem taking on a comic book movie. Also, it has been announced that Halle Berry will be joining Mark Wahlberg in a spy movie, Our Man from Jersey. And Zac Efron and Russell Crowe have been brought in to replace Dylan O'Brien and Viggo Mortensen in Peter Farrelly's Beer Run. So there are all sorts of casting shakeups happening in the industry at this point. And there you have it, the first news feature on the GSMC Movie Podcast. I hope to make that a regular feature coming out of what I refer to as halftime of the show. I do have to come up with a name for it though, and I probably need to get an intro made for it. So those things are on my to-do list. But for now, let's get back to the action, and by that I mean talking about the new releases and the new films coming out. And one I want to talk about is The Good Traitor. And this film film is based on true events, and it's one of a couple of films that are coming out right now that are focusing on World War II. I will most likely be talking about another one of those in my next episode. But the premise of this story is when the Nazis invade the country of Denmark, the Danish ambassador to Washington essentially is rejecting the Danish surrender, completely not recognizing the Nazis as the ruling government of his country, and is looking to establish himself as the government for Denmark. So The Good Traitor is about how he goes about doing that by seeking aid from the American government, and it's a really compelling story. I mean, just imagining if your country was conquered and you have the choice between playing along or, from a legal standpoint, committing treason and risking your own life in order to preserve the integrity of your nation. And that is exactly what Heinrich Kaufmann did. He sought aids from the Americans to help defend Denmark colonies in Greenland and was condemned by the Nazi government controlling Denmark at the time, but because he considered Denmark to be under control by a hostile nation and therefore unable to act in its own best interests. For that, he was charged with high treason, and like a badass, he just ignored that, for which he was stripped of his rank, but he ignored this as well, and really encouraged diplomats around the world to ignore all instructions they received from the capital of Copenhagen. And I know in hindsight it's obvious, don't follow the instructions of the Nazis, but at the time, countries in Europe were falling one by one to them, and for someone from a neutral country like Denmark, receiving new orders and flat out rejecting them took a lot of courage at the time. This was still in the very early stages of the war. America was still staying out of it as Pearl Harbor hadn't happened yet. And here's this one man essentially saying, I understand that I fall in a certain place within the chain of command, but that chain of command has been ethically compromised. So any orders I receive, it would be unethical for me to act on them. And that's a fairly complex issue when it comes down to whether or not you obey the person in charge who may be giving you unethical instructions and commands, or if you say, screw this, I know that this is unethical, I'm not going to be a part of this. And I'm sure we all like to believe that we live in an ethical world where people in power don't do anything to abuse that power or give commands to people they have control over to do something unethical, but as we all know, that's not always the case. I can remember in my own past when I've worked for people that have asked me to do unethical things and I've stuck to my morals and refused to do so. That affects how I am then treated by the person who's asking me to do something I deem unethical. Now, in my own cases, I wasn't charged with high treason and had the penalty of death hanging over my head if I was ever incarcerated by the people who charged me with that, but Kaufman was. And thus, the movie The Good Traitor details the heroic efforts he made, not only to protect the integrity of his home nation of Denmark, but really to contribute to sabotaging the Nazi war machine. And there are so many stories like this that have come out after the fact where there were people doing subtle things to undermine Hitler and his followers during this time. And it really just goes to show how many people were working against him and fighting the spread of Nazism. But this story in particular and this film, The Good Traitor, is really going to be an exercise in the inner conflict that comes with following orders and doing as you're told, while also trying to do the right and moral thing, which unfortunately in this world are not always mutually exclusive. And in this film, early on, it's portrayed that the diplomat lifestyle is essentially just going to parties, drinking champagne, and having a good time, and making sure everyone has a good impression of you. So it's essentially just the easy life. But when duty calls and real responsibility is thrust onto Kaufman, he has to respond and take up the mantle of leadership to really make sure that his people are not enveloped by the Nazi party. So watching the character go through that transformation from essentially living the good life and not having a care in the world to basically, for all intents and purposes, fighting for the soul of his nation will be a very compelling internal struggle to watch throughout the film. And just to give you an idea of the timeline of events that were happening during World War II at the point which this film is set, Denmark is invaded April 9th of 1940. Prior to that, Germany had occupied what was formerly Czechoslovakia, and during the Munich conference, Great Britain and France actually signed off on the occupation. So not only is Germany annexing other countries, there are other major countries in Europe that are approving it. Poland is being occupied, southern Norway is being occupied, concentration camps are already being set up. And after occupying Denmark, Germany invades countries like the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, France, Greece, Yugoslavia. So this wasn't just a nation going rogue and engaging in a bunch of futile military efforts. Germany was winning on all fronts, and the governments of the nations that they were conquering were just submitting to Nazi rule. So for essentially one man to be the first person to really stand up and say that he wasn't going to accept the new world order of things was incredibly brave, because at the time, again, the US hadn't entered the war. Countries like England were trying to stay out of it as not to put their people in harm's way. And here's Kaufman just saying, to hell with what you're telling me to do. I know what is in the best interests of my nation, and I'm going to act accordingly. I suppose if we were to compare him to someone, I guess it would be Charles de Gaulle, who led the underground resistance in France when the Nazis occupied them. But while Charles de Gaulle was operating in secret, Kaufman was openly flaunting the fact that he was disobeying the Nazi rule. And his actions really just make you think about the concept of following orders in general, and whether or not you should be questioning authority and doing what you really believe to be ethically right. And it's unfortunate that so often in our daily lives we are forced to choose between self-preservation and what will make our situation the most amenable, and what we deem to be ethically good. But the film The Good Traitor is based on the story of a man who was faced with just that conundrum, and instead of doing what so many other people in his position were doing at the time, he decided to go against the grain and stand up to possibly the greatest evil the world has ever seen. And I think it's great that Kaufman's story is being told. I'm just kind of wondering why it's taken so long to get a feature-length film made about the man who essentially told the Nazis to go screw. So if anyone is interested in seeing a historical movie about a man who refused to compromise his morals, I suggest checking out The Good Traitor. And while the cast is probably not as well known to American audiences, they do have a wealth of experience, and I just think it's a general rule of thumb that European actors tend to be better than their American counterparts. But in the lead role of Heinrich Kaufmann is Ulrich Thompson, who has over 100 acting credits to his name and a plethora of awards to go along with them. In the role of Heinrich's wife, Charlotte Kaufman, is Denise Goff, who has been in films such as Russell Crowe's Robin Hood. And some interesting facts about the real-life Charlotte Kaufman: she was the daughter of the Naval Rear Admiral William McDougall at the time. So Heinrich was pretty politically connected back in the day. Some other major actors in the film are Bern Gorman, who is probably best known for his minor role in The Dark Knight Rises as Stryver, and his appearance on Game of Thrones where he played Carl Tanner. And rounding out the main cast is Zoe Tapper, who seems to have a history of playing characters named Kate. She has been in series like The One, Liar, and Survivors. So seeing this ensemble cast reenacting historical events will be a compelling watch to see the take that they have on it and how they portray these real-life human beings. So again, for anyone who is interested in checking out The Good Traitor, it will be debuting Friday, March 26th, and it will be available exclusively in theaters. So if you are going to check it out, be sure and be safe. But right now, we're going to take a break on the GSMC Movie Podcast, but be sure to stick around as we're going to be diving into the nominees of the Screen Actors Guild Awards. And I'm going to be giving my picks of who I think's going to win. And I know that I've been spending a lot of time on award shows in recent episodes, and some of you are probably wondering, why am I focusing on this award ceremony when it's a pretty minor one? It's only been around for 27 years. But I've always really taken stock in the SGA Awards, given that they're voted on by other actors, and with certain institutions like the Hollywood Foreign Press and the Academy of Motion Pictures. I think that sometimes the things that they vote as the best are not necessarily the most deserving, but I think that they have certain criteria that they have a soft spot for, and if a movie touches on a certain issue, they are predisposed to vote in favor of that. And I'm pretty sure I remember at the time when Leonardo DiCaprio was nominated for The Wolf of Wall Street, a lot of members of the Academy didn't vote for him because they didn't want to be essentially rewarding the behavior that he portrayed in that film. But that really isn't what it's supposed to be about. It's really supposed to be who gave the best acting job that year. And the things he put himself through for that role were definitely worthy of recognition. So I think an institution like the SAG Awards has the room to be a bit more impartial and a little more accurate when it comes to recognizing who gave the best performances of the year. So that's what we're going to be jumping into when we come back from the break. So don't go anywhere. The GSMC Movie Podcast will be right back.
Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blank and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
Back into the GSMC Movie Podcast for our fourth and final segment. On this episode, we have covered the films Godzilla vs. Kong, which by all accounts seems like it's living up to the epic billing those two movie characters warrant. We also talked about the new Bob Odenkirk film, Nobody, which is shaping up to be an action-packed dark comedy. And in our last segment, I talked about the film The Good Traitor. Based on true events, it details the story of the Danish ambassador who, when the Nazis occupied Denmark, refused to go along with their orders. So we have covered a wide variety of films, and right now I want to talk about another award ceremony, the Screen Actors Guild Awards. And these are the awards given out to outstanding actors for their performances in both film and TV, and they are voted upon by members of the Screen Actors Union. They have been given out since 1995, and they are a pretty good indicator of Oscar success, more so even than an award ceremony like the Golden Globes. And I've touched on it a little bit in previous segments when teasing this topic. I really think that the Screen Actors Guild Awards are a pretty good indicator of who actually gave the best performance of the year. Like I said in the previous segment, organizations like the Hollywood Foreign Press and even the Academy of Motion Pictures, I think they have a lot of preconceived notions of what makes a great film. And they have a bunch of key issues that when a film touches on that subject, they're pretty much inclined to vote for that solely because it deals with that subject matter. But when an award is voted on by your peers, the people that know exactly what goes into giving an outstanding performance, I think it's a better indicator of who is actually the most deserving of the award. So I really think that something like the SAG Awards can hold even more weight than something like the Academy Awards when it comes to acting, for the reasons I previously mentioned. So there is my 2 cents on the weight a SAG Award holds. And before I get into the categories and the nominees, just want to give a little background on how these awards are voted on. So each year, there are 2 committees made up of 2,100 people, one for film, one for TV. They are made up of the Screen Actors Union. They are randomly selected and different each year, but they are the ones that are voting on the nominees and determining who is most deserving of the award. And when it comes to the categories, there are only 6 for film. And these are Best Male Actor in a Leading Role, Best Male Actor in a Supporting Role, Best Female Actress in a Leading Role, Best Female Actress in a Supporting Role, Outstanding Performance by a Cast in a Motion Picture, and Outstanding Performance by Stunt Assembly in a Motion Picture. So nice to see that the stunt actors are getting recognized here. So without any further ado, we will get into the nominees. And why don't we start off with Best Stunt Assembly in a Motion Picture? And the nominees in this category are The Five Bloods, Mulan, News of the World, The Trial of the Chicago 7, and Wonder Woman 1984. To give a brief description of each of these films, The Five Bloods is about a group of Vietnam veterans that are returning to Vietnam in order to locate the remains of their fallen squad leader. So the stunt coordination in that film involves a lot of war scenes, as flashbacks were a heavy feature in this Spike Lee film. And Mulan, I'm pretty sure everyone knows what Mulan is about, but this was Disney's live-action adaptation of their animated feature, and the stunt coordination in this film involved a lot of sword fighting, so you need experts when you're working with weapons like that. Even if they are props, they are still very heavy and very dangerous to handle. News of the World is the Tom Hanks film where he is returning a young girl to her original home, and he's crossing the American frontier, as this is set in the 1800s. So the stunts in this film involved a lot of horse riding, as well as gunfights. And the next film nominated in this category is The Trial of the Chicago 7. The stunt coordination in this film included a bunch of choreographed fight scenes, as this film details the real events of people inciting riots at the 1968 Democratic National Convention in Chicago. And the final nominee in this category is Wonder Woman 1984. And that's another film that is pretty self-explanatory, but it's a comic book movie detailing the heroic actions of fan favorite Wonder Woman, which involved a lot of fight scenes and major stunts. And when it comes down to picking a winner for this category, I really think it's a two-film race between Wonder Woman 1984 and Mulan. Not to take anything away from any of the other nominees, I just feel that the stunts in these two films were on a much grander scale. And between these two nominees, it's really tough to pick a winner, but gun to my head, I'm going to have to go with Mulan. I think anytime you're dealing with choreographed fights that need to be as precise as sword fights, the people in charge of putting those together deserve extra recognition, so there you have it. I think Mulan is going to win Outstanding Performance by a Stunt Assembly in a Motion Picture. And moving right along to the next category, I'd say we'll go with Outstanding Performance by a Female Actor in a Supporting Role. And the nominees in this category are Maria Bakalova for Borat's subsequent movie film where she played Tutar, Glenn Close in Hillbilly Elegy for her performance as Bonnie Ma Vance, Olivia Colman for The Father as Anne, Yu Yun for Monaria as Suja, and Helena Zengel for News of the World, where she played Johanna Leonberger. To give you an idea of each of these performances, Maria Bakalova was essentially playing a female version of Sacha Baron Cohen's character Borat, and she did such a convincing job of playing this character that Rudy Giuliani actually believed that she was the actual character, and there's a pretty embarrassing scene involving him in that film. But moving on to the next nominee, Glenn Close portrays a matriarch of a very rural family, and she really transformed her appearance to play this role, as she is pretty unrecognizable. Olivia Colman plays the daughter of Anthony Hopkins, as he is the titular The Father, and she is both charged with raising her own son and helping her own father come to grips with his own mortality. Yoo Jung-yeon plays the grandmother of a South Korean family that has emigrated to America, and she is there to help take care of the children while also being forced to share a room with one of them. And the final nominee, Helena Zengel, plays the little girl that Tom Hanks is returning to her home village. And her character does not speak English, so a lot of her communication and acting is done solely through facial expressions. So when you're an actor, both at the very young age that she is and pretty much unable to have any dialogue, you have to be pretty inventive with your performance. Now, all these nominees are very deserving, but when it comes to picking a winner, I'm going to have to go with Maria Baklavac for her role as Tudor in Borat's subsequent movie film. Mostly because this movie wasn't just a performance for the cameras, they were legitimately acting as these characters in front of real-life people and eliciting those responses with people legitimately thinking they are those characters. And with everyone knowing who Borat is, Sacha Baron Cohen had to take on a lesser role in this film when it came to that aspect of it, and she was really left shouldering the load. So I believe for those reasons, Maria Baklavac is going to be the winner for Outstanding Performance by a Female Actor in a Supporting Role. And moving right along to Outstanding Performance by a Male Actor in a Supporting Role, we have Sacha Baron Cohen for The Trial of the Chicago 7 as real-life person Abby Hoffman, Chadwick Boseman with his first nomination of the night for Da 5 Bloods as Norman Earl Holloway. We also have Daniel Kaluuya for Judas and the Black Messiah, where he played Fred Hampton. Additionally, Jared Leto is nominated for his performance in The Little Things as Albert Sparma. And Leslie Odom Jr. is nominated for his performance of Sam Cooke for One Night in Miami. And there are a lot of actors portraying real-life people. Sam Cooke, of course, was the famous musician. Fred Hampton was the Black Panther chapter president for Illinois. And Abby Hoffman was the founder of the Youth International Party, otherwise known as the Yippies. And he was one of the 7 tried in the trial of the Chicago 7. Chadwick Boseman's character was the fallen squad leader that the main characters are looking to recover on their trip back to Vietnam. And Jared Leto's character of Albert Sparma is the main suspect in a murder investigation. So out of all these very deserving actors who turned in incredible performances, I think Daniel Kaluuya is going to take this one just because his performance as Fred Hampton oozes charisma at every turn, and he really did an outstanding job transforming himself into this real-life character. Moving right along to our next category, which will be Outstanding Performance by a Female Actor in a Leading Role. The nominees are Amy Adams for Hillbilly Elegy, where she plays Beverly Bev Vance, Viola Davis for Ma Rainey's Black Bottom as the titular character, Vanessa Kirby for Pieces of a Woman, where she plays Martha Weiss, Frances McDermott for Nomadland, where she plays Fern, and Carrie Mulligan for Promising Young Woman, where she plays Cassandra Cassie Thomas. To give you a rundown of the characters, Amy Adams plays a mother who is going through drug rehabilitation. Viola Davis plays titular character Ma Rainey, who is a blues singer. And the film details a turbulent recording session that took place in the 1920s. Vanessa Kirby plays a woman who is coping with the loss of her infant child. Frances McDermott is playing a woman who uproots her life to tour around the American Southwest. And Carrie Mulligan plays a woman out for revenge after one of her friends has been raped. Of all the categories, I would say this is probably the most hotly contested, just given the wide range of characters that these actors had to inhabit and the different emotions each had to tap into. But if I have to pick someone, and I have to because I said that's what I'd be doing in this segment, I'm going to go with Carrie Mulligan for her performance as Cassie Thompson in Promising Young Woman. Mainly because this is just such a departure from the traditional damsel in distress type role that young actresses are usually coaxed into playing. And her character is really a no-nonsense individual. So for that, I feel she is going to win Outstanding Performance by a Female Actor in a Leading Role. But moving right along to Outstanding Performance by a Male Actor in a Leading Role, we have Riz Ahmed for The Sound of Metal as Reuben Stone, Chadwick Boseman with his second nomination at this award ceremony for Ma Rainey's Black Bottom as Levi Green, Anthony Hopkins for The Father as Anthony, Gary Oldman as Herman J. Mankiewicz in Mank, and Stephen Yeun for his portrayal of Jacob Yee in Minari. And to once again give you a rundown of the characters they play, Ahmed plays a drummer that is losing his hearing, and the film follows him as he struggles with that. Anthony Hopkins plays Anthony, a man who is coming to grips with his own mortality. Gary Oldman is playing Herman J. Mankiewicz, a screenwriter who is responsible for such classics as Citizen Kane, and the movie details his life during that period. And Stephen Yeun plays Jacob Yee, a man who has uprooted his family from California to a new plot of land in rural Arkansas. And the final nominee in this category is Chadwick Boseman for his portrayal of Levy Green in Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, where he plays a blues performer. And I do think that he is going to win this. Not to take anything away from his performance, but I really think he could have been portraying anybody and he would win this award because his peers are going to recognize him for a tragic loss and a career that was cut far too short. Not to take anything away from the terrific actors that turned in amazing performances in this category, but I think that Chadwick Boseman will be taking home the outstanding performance by a male actor in a leading role. And wrapping up with the final category, which is outstanding performance by a cast in a motion picture, the nominees are Da 5 Bloods, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, Minari, One Night in Miami, and The Trial of the Chicago 7. Now, all of these films had tremendous casts in them, but I really do think The Trial of the Chicago 7 is going to take this one home, given that they had the likes of Sacha Baron Cohen in it, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Michael Keaton, Eddie Redmayne, Yahya Abdul-Mateen II, Frank Langella, John Carroll Lynch, Alex Sharp, and Jeremy Strong, among others. So nothing against any of the other casts in these films, but I do think The Trial of the Chicago 7 will be taking home outstanding performance by a cast in a motion picture. So there you have it, the nominees and my picks for the Screen Actors Guild Awards. For all those interested in watching, the award ceremony will be taking place April 4th, Easter Sunday, and will be broadcast on TBS and TNT at 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, 6 o'clock Pacific. So for all of you interested in checking it out, be sure to tune in. That'll do it for me here on the GSMC Movie Podcast, and I do want to thank everybody who is listening to the podcast. If you have not already, be sure to subscribe so you're always notified when a new episode is available, and be sure to write us a nice review. Those really help us a lot. And be sure to engage with us on our social media pages on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I have been your host, Rich McDonough, and that will do it for me on this episode of the GSMC Movie Podcast.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.